Okay, welcome back to Squirrel Brain Stories, everyone. I'm Angela, and today I have a special guest, my husband, Buck, who will be joining me for today's podcast. And we're going to do a little bit of different take on the podcast. We're going to do some perspective podcasting, and yeah, it should be fun.
Yeah, we're going to go through a little bit more of the logistics of the cult itself. And then we'll probably break this up into two parts. So the second one will be a little more a deeper dive into kind of what it looks like now with her and the effects that the trauma in her childhood and her young adulthood has had on her, and kind of what that means and how recovery happens. And so we're going to start with some of the logistics, though, during this episode. So I'm going to have a section here where we give you a little bit more specifics about the cult itself and the people involved. And so I'm going to read a statement, and I'm going to put some things up on the screen so you guys can see what we're talking about. So we have some things that we found, some articles in various newspapers, and because we found those, now we can name people. So that's kind of very exciting, isn't it?
Yep.
So, well, now that we've dragged ourselves through the abyss of personal trauma with you and Adria, you've gone through, at this point, 6 episodes. We're going to now pivot a little bit to the institutional incompetence that allowed this whole thing to happen. And, you know, when you're running a criminal enterprise that spans multiple states and international borders, the key is always documentation. And it seems our cult leaders and their associates were considered enough to get caught and wind up in the newspaper, which is what you'll see on the screen as I read this. And naturally, this is very useful to us because we're going to reference information that has been a matter of public record for years, published in sources like the Oregonian and the Star Bulletin. This isn't just hearsay, it's the paper trail left by people the system should have stopped, but apparently we're too busy looking the other way. Specifically, we can publicly confirm the names of the individuals charged with major felonies. The leader of the ministry indicted for sexual assault is Manuel Guillermo Tabuda, also known as Memo. He went by Memo. And Angela's first husband, federally charged with smuggling illegal immigrants, is Luis Rojas. The newspaper identified Angela by her maiden name at the time, Angela Espinosa, as his ex-wife who alerted authorities. And here's the truly spectacular part. Angela and her second husband were actively working with ICE, which we'll get into, as confidential informants in the Rojas case, providing key details and testimony. And these genius agents at the Immigration and Customs Enforcement saw fit to have her name, the informant's name, printed directly in the Oregonian. They didn't just drop the ball, they accelerated it. The consequence of their spectacular operational failure, not only after that article ran, Angela and her husband found bullet holes in their apartment, which we will go over that story, probably with Adria in the coming weeks. It's a genuine thrill to confirm that the monsters we've been discussing were indeed actual federal and state felons. The only question now is why the authorities decided to treat this like a parking violation instead of a RICO case, and then immediately compromise the safety of their primary witness. I think as we go through this podcast, at some point, we're going to show on the screen all the different bureaucracies and all the different agencies that failed you along the way. And it's good. It's truly spectacular.
The list is growing.
It keeps growing every episode. I want to do some pivoting on some of the things we've talked about and just circle back around a little bit. So I find it interesting that these people these leaders were prosecuted for sexual assault, but the real big picture, what they were involved in, has not really come to light. Like, they haven't really connected the dots.
No.
Why do you think that is?
Because it's Portland.
Okay. Explain, what does that mean?
Well,
like sanctuary city? Is that what you mean?
Sanctuary city. all of the governors that have come and gone that just really, slap on the wrist, no prosecution, looking the other way, just so much crap.
I think, as we go through this, I want to make it clear, at least my personal opinion is that, the police officers and a lot of these people down at the ground level are not to blame. Because I think if you follow the chain of a lot of this going across the country, not just with illegal immigration, sexual assault, it goes across the gamut. But I think that what you'll find is that the reason crime is increasing in places, and it's tricky because they try to trick you, right? They give you statistics, but if the crimes are not reported because they know people are not going to be prosecuted, well, they don't go into the statistics. Mm-hmm. So it just serves the whole machine. And I think that the DA, the district attorneys across the country, and the judges they're just not prosecuting people. And so when you're a police officer on the ground, and I have a lot of friends, that are police officers, they say the same thing, that, as soon as I get this guy off the streets, he's going to be back on the streets the next day. So they try to focus their energies a little more on something that's going to stick. And what ends up happening is a lot of these things with the most vulnerable in our society get just swept under the rug. Mm-hmm. And this is a really good example of a lot of people, a crazy thing that was going on right in the middle of Portland. And they just did nothing about it.
For decades.
Yeah. So I wanted to talk about some numbers. So I did a little bit of math. So you talked about you talked about 60 people being in each house?
Roughly around 60.
How many of those were paying?
Every male that worked.
So would you guesstimate maybe 30 in each house? If you had to throw down a number, how many people were handing money to the church leader?
Yeah, probably rent? At least 30. Plus you had all the outside people that were giving their tithes too.
Right. So if we just focus on that right now, and we look at the numbers of what we're talking about, just so you can understand, how much money that is. And the living conditions, this isn't like you're renting an apartment. You're living in a room with 6 to 10 people. These people were what it sounds to me like is it's indentured servitude. Because it wasn't just, I'm assuming can we assume that what they were paying was also probably paying for the coyotes, for getting them across the border? It was literally just room. It wasn't even board, because they were paying for their own food.
Yeah, if you had your room and you had a refrigerator, then you bought your own food, and
and everything else you ate was from donations.
Expired food.
Yeah. Yeah, expired donation. So, and it was only the Hispanic members that were working, males that were working. Mm-hmm. So, because the Americans that were there, the reason they weren't working is because did they have to still pay to live there? Or was there not very many?
I don't think so. I don't think the American men that lived there were paying because they weren't working. They were put more to doing donations. A lot of them did donation pickups every day and donation drop-offs.
Okay. So they were working for the cult, but they weren't necessarily working to pay off anything. Mm-hmm. So this sounds like it was indentured servitude. Like they had to pay a certain amount before they would be let go. Did you see people come into the cult and then pay for a while and then leave?
Well, I didn't see a whole lot of money exchanging because that didn't happen in front of everyone. I would see what my prearranged husband would give, and I knew that others gave too, but it wasn't done in public in front of everyone.
So So are you making the assumption that everybody was paying, or are you pretty sure?
Yeah, we knew everyone.
Knew everybody was paying.
Yeah.
Okay. Because if you look at the numbers, $400 a month with 30 people in each house. This is a 3-bedroom home. I don't know what you would guess back in 20 years ago how much the a mortgage payment was, but I mean maybe $2,000 is what I would guess. Mortgage payment for a 3-bedroom home 20 years ago.
Oh, they were more than 3-bedroom homes.
Well, a 3-story I meant.
Oh, okay.
3-story, but okay, let's say 6-bedroom home, 5-bedroom home. Back then, 2,000, 2,500. Even if it was 3,000, you're talking about $12,000 a month they're getting from 30 people living there. 12,000 a month. So that's a pretty tidy sum.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it just shows why why it was so easy for them to keep expanding.
Yeah.
I mean, buying a house in Hawaii, like, can you even imagine what a house in Hawaii would cost? And I believe there was 2 houses on the property that they owned in Hawaii.
Wow. It's funny, in that one article, they actually called the church the Peach House, which is interesting because that's not the name of the church. It's just the name you gave to the house, right? So if you talk about 3 houses in Portland and then another one in Hawaii
and in Seattle
and another one in Seattle, so that's 5 houses, 30 people in each house or so, 20 to 30 probably. That's a pretty good bracket. I mean, this is why, when I was looking at all the different things as you go through, all the different charges and how you would build a case like this, because, I don't know if anybody else watching this, I'm a big true crime fan, my sister and I love to watch all the serial killers and the murderers and stuff. So my mind works that way. And I know you're analytical like that too. She does more research and she always has her ducks in a row with everything.
I try.
So it was interesting going through, like, just reading the list of charges that if a competent DA was in charge of this case back then, what they would have been able to charge people with. And I have a list here right in front of me. And so we have sex trafficking of children and forced labor. I think that's pretty clear. Because there was such a disparity between the males and females in there. What did you say? It was 30 to 1 or so, or maybe a little less than that, 20 to 1.
Yeah.
Something like that. There's 6 girls in a house full of men, basically, right? In your situation. So, you have sex trafficking of children, forced labor, conspiracy to commit marriage fraud. I mean, that was right there. That's a felony. These are all federal charges, by the way. Alien smuggling, coyote operations. You have conspiracy to defraud the United States, money laundering, tax evasion, fraud, mail fraud, wire fraud, racketeering, and is RICO. I mean, they could have been charged under the RICO Act. And that was from 1961. So guess what? That qualifies. And then you have all these state charges. You have rape, sexual assault, child molestation, and we'll get to that later on as you have some more of your guests. You have coercion, kidnapping, criminal mistreatment in the first degree, and that pertains to to children and non-schooling of minors. So I don't know if you knew that was a crime too, but in the state of Oregon, it is a criminal mistreatment in the first degree if you don't put your child in some type of schooling. Wow. So, and then you have conspiracy to commit statutory rape, which your parents could have been charged with, because they allowed a 21-year-old to marry you, even though it was, we talked about Idaho State and how they failed you, in the state of Idaho. And, I was going to ask you, like, do you think that was on purpose? Do you think they were, because we looked at the paperwork and it didn't appear that there was any falsification of paperwork as far as birthdays or whatever. So what do you think happened there?
I think he called to make the appointment because, since we were traveling across state lines, he didn't want to show up and, So my assumption is he called and they told him that, oh, you're almost 21. Well, you can get married if you're not 21. And she's 16. And I think that's why there was the excuse to the rush, the marriage, hurry and get over there before he turns 21. And his mother was used as an excuse that she was going to be here when the white dress wedding happened, which would have never been the case because she didn't have papers. She wasn't going to jump the border. She didn't have one leg.
Yeah.
So she was not going to be coming across illegally. So there was no way at all that she would have been able to come here to make that marriage. So I believe the mother was an excuse just to hurry and get us over there and married before he turned 21. Because they probably told him, yeah, we'll make the appointment for you and you can get married, but you can't be 21.
What year was this?
1996.
Okay. So this probably would have been before computers. So everything was paperwork, which means, what I'm assuming, because it doesn't just go through one person.
No.
When you get married, it goes through the clerk, it goes through whoever answers the phone. You have to get a license first. I'm assuming once the license is approved, a lot of times the judge probably doesn't even look at the paperwork. He just signs it because the license is where if you're not granted a license if you are too young or if there's a problem, right?
Yeah.
But
if the system works.
Right, if the system works. So it sounds like there was something going on with the licensing there. I don't know if I would call it a criminal conspiracy, but it certainly is a failure of an institution to protect you. It's one of those things where we have a whole list of all these failures. So we have a long list of charges that could have happened, and what they end up doing is just getting caught for molesting somebody. And it came out years later, right? Do you know much about the specific case?
No, I know that the allegations were made before they left to Hawaii.
Okay.
And nothing happened for years and years.
Was this tied to the bathroom incident?
Yes.
Where they saw him? So was it the same person?
It was in Portland when they discovered that he was having inappropriate contact with this girl.
And then
child.
She went with him to Hawaii.
Yeah, he took her.
And it continued.
Yeah.
So then, what does that tell you about the control?
Everyone was so afraid of him that they didn't even have the courage to call the police. But police was not involved at all. Any time anything would happen to a victim, it would be the victim's fault, and you were put to blame, you were punished, you were beaten. And the cops were never called because you were looking for it. Yeah.
I think something needs to be pointed out. And, there's a lot of division in this country right now, especially with the ICE raids going on and all the current things. But this is something that I've heard of a lot. I've heard this kind of thing mentioned about the danger of an open border or just an unregulated border where you're letting people come and go easily, and how dangerous it is, not for the citizens who live in America. We can handle ourselves, generally speaking. What I think gets ignored is how incredibly dangerous it is for the people who are coming across. Because what happens is they're put in these situations where it's basically indentured servitude. You're a slave until you work this debt off. Mm-hmm. Or in this case, I don't know if it was obviously they were paying, but they had nowhere else to go and they had no papers. So whether or not it was a direct, like, you owe me $20,000 and you're going to work and pay me this and live here in this slum, 10 people in a room and eat garbage all day. I don't know if it was, we don't know that, right?
No, I know with the prearranged husband, he paid his whatever $100 a month, but he also would write a check and he would also give a check so he was double paying. So
do you think that was for you?
I don't know. Because
that's the other thing we talked about is it sounds like
for me or for paying off what he owed from coming illegally from Mexico.
So he was one of the coyotes. He came over with a coyote.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So he was smuggled across and then someone picked him up. But this happened before you got there?
Yeah.
Okay. So, what happens is you have these situations like this. And this is a perfect example of what you hear on the news and everybody just ignores, which is it's dangerous for the people coming across. Not only have, I think I just read a statistic that since the border was closed down and ICE got, really more involved in the last 4 or 5 months, they've already found 230,000 missing children.
Wow.
And how does that happen, you say? Well, this is how it happens. You have a group coming up from Mexico who are living in these terrible conditions, and they're forced to work and pay someone, and they cannot and will not go to the police for anything. Because why? Because they'll be sent home. They're afraid to get sent back home.
Mm-hmm.
So you're creating this.
Well, and we had that as a scare tactic. We would have the immigration raids, and we'd be sent to the park all day. They'd have people hiding up in the attic all day, and they'd send the rest of us to the park.
I mean, even if it wasn't true and there wasn't any immigration raids, it's kind of a brilliant tactic.
To keep people in fear.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
compliant.
Right. Because if you're like, ICE is looking for us, even if they weren't, which I bet there's a really good chance it wasn't.
No.
Because, ICE doesn't just give up like that. If they see 50 people coming and going in that house that are all Hispanic and then all of a sudden they're gone.
Well, and ICE doesn't move that quickly.
No.
I think it was DHS welfare checks.
Or nobody.
Yeah,
it could have been just a way to keep the population scared and grateful for what they're doing for them, protecting them.
Yeah.
At every corner, every time you turn around, there's another method of control that's going on. It's multi-layered. And I think you find that in a lot of cults, but this is a different kind, We've watched a lot of films on cults, and I've seen, Jim Jones, and, we've all seen those documentaries. This is fascinating just because of how it's a different level.
It's multi-layered.
It's multi-layered. It's multicultural. It's not just, a lot of these cults, you're like, oh, these people, there's something wrong with them because why would they believe this crazy person? Well, this is like there's a huge carrot for all these people. It's not just you're going to get into the kingdom of God at the end, which is a little more ambiguous for people to really wrap their brains around. Like when you say, like, I can't really identify with those cults where it's just like promising them, oh, we're going to get taken up into a spaceship at the end, or, the comet's going to come down and say, I can't wrap my head around that kind of crazy. I really can't. But this, if you're promising me papers and I live in Mexico and you're promising me to live in the greatest country on earth, I would be like, sign me up. How many times do I need to read my Bible? I'll do it. You know what I mean? Yeah. If at the end, there's a huge carrot like, oh, we're going to keep you safe. And, God is with us. That's kind of an extra little thing, right? Especially down in where it's part of the culture in Mexico, right? Would you say the church is in God and everything is a little more?
There's a lot of Catholics, but there's these offspring missionary groups down there.
And do they do a lot of good down there that you've seen or heard when you were down there? Or was it just a racket?
When I was down in Mexico, I didn't have anything to do with any of the churches.
Okay.
So I don't know, but, seeing what I've seen here, I can't assume that it was any different. There's probably a lot of abuse going on, keeping people compliant, keeping people obedient so they can get their tithes, you know.
So this other carrot that we're talking about, there's the promise of, I don't know if there was a direct promise of getting papers. Obviously there was, you're going to be living in America and we're going to protect you and you're going to have a job So clearly they got jobs without papers.
It's because they knew where to go to get fake papers and fake Social Security cards.
Yep. So they had
Even one of the American guys got a fake birth certificate one time.
Why?
Because he had a drug problem and he liked his prescription narcotics.
Oh.
And so he got in trouble for forging signatures on scripts. He stole some scripts from a doctor's office. The paper prescriptions, the blank ones. So he got into some trouble, and I don't know why, but I remember the prearranged husband helping him, get a new birth certificate so he can get a new driver's license.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. It's funny because, you'd go to the Mexican stores and they'd be like, Mika, Mika, when you'd walk in, green card, So they just stand outside at the markets advertising, hey, I can get you papers.
Wow. Interesting.
Mm-hmm. And I'm not against Hispanics, but like every country.
Well, all your kids are Hispanic.
Yeah, all of my kids are. I have 5 kids, and they're all Hispanic. So obviously, I don't have a problem with Hispanics. That's not what we're getting at. Like every country, there is the rules and regulations that you follow to get access to that country. You don't just go and enter however you want. Like even my experience in Mexico, we drove down to Mexico, and when you drive down to Mexico, you're allowed to be in the country for 6 months.
Okay.
And I went over my 6 months, and I was not allowed to leave until I paid a $1,200 fine just so I can buy my plane ticket.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. Every day that went by, my fine got bigger and bigger.
Yeah, so they don't mess around.
No, they don't. It's every country has their own rules.
Listen, I took a wrong turn and I ended up in Canada. I was going to Niagara Falls, and there's this one exit, and you turn left or turn right, and I'm like, oh, turn right. Oh, I went to the wrong one, and I went through, and there's no turnaround spot. So once you're in that lane, you're going into Canada. And we sat for like 3 hours. It was me and like 4 little kids.
Oh, jeez.
And my wife at the time. And we sat in the little office there for, it was hours. Yeah. So it's crazy if you've ever gone to another country and then come back and say, oh, have a problem with border control. It blows me away. Just try going to get into any other country. Mm-hmm. But anyway, I digress. So the other layer that I found interesting was because there's clearly a reward system and a hierarchy that you've talked about. You talked about there's leaders that are in the church. And let's talk a little bit about who, not necessarily directly who they are, but in general terms, who these leaders are, why they were chosen, and what they were promised.
Well, all of the leaders that were there when I arrived were already there, and they had already married their American women, and they all had their papers already. Okay.
So that was something that clearly was part of this, that if you're a leader, if you become a leader, and what does it take to be a leader in this cult?
Obedient.
But you also mentioned that some of the leaders were chosen specifically because they had connections in the community.
Yes, I believe that was because even the leader himself, he would pick people, it was like a chess game. He had his people that he, would pick amongst the community, and he would, chummy up to them so that way he could benefit, whether it was, someone that had a business and had access to money. He knew that they would be good at tithing, whether it be another prominent leader in the community. Well, he knew that if he made a friendship with them, that would also encompass the people that they had connections with. And, he would just keep growing and growing.
So, okay. So that's interesting. So, and that's how you found yourself married to, or chosen to be married.
Yeah, because
he was going to be one of the next leaders. Mm-hmm. Okay. And what that does, that's a direct, I'm sure that was seen by other people in the cult, right? As like, oh, because that immediately solves all your problems. Because as soon as you marry an American woman, you get papers and you're legal and you don't have to worry about anything else, right?
Yeah. And it was funny because after we were married, you had to wait 6 months, I think, before you could do immigration papers.
Okay.
I didn't even know the appointment was made. And he's like, come on, we're going. We have an appointment. I'm like, okay. And it was at the immigration office, and he's there doing his interview. And he lied straight to immigration. Have you ever helped people come across the border from Mexico? And he's like, no. And I'm like, but I know you have. Right. I didn't say anything. I mean,
yeah.
What could I say? That I'm not going to get in trouble for later, because they're not going to do anything on the spot. He's not going to get arrested or anything.
Right. So later on, when you turned him in and went through this whole thing, they didn't revoke his citizenship?
No, because back then you got citizenship. It wasn't just a green card.
So even if you lied on your citizenship interview, they didn't care?
Well, I don't know if they connected those dots.
It seems like there's a lot of dots that they're not connecting. Mm-hmm. Like this whole case. So can you talk a little bit about the ICE sting? And we'll put the newspaper clipping back up so you, if people want to read it, we can have it on there on the screen here. Do you want to go through that now, or do you want to talk about with Adria later?
Well, it overlaps with the prearranged husband and my second husband.
Right.
So, like I said in the ending podcast with Adria, was once I got my credit report and I saw the credit card debt, and I started a secret bank account where I was putting $20 every paycheck, and I just had to sit tight and wait for a little while until I had enough for a lawyer. So I just, played the waiting game for a little bit. And once I decided, I was like, okay, this shit is too much. And I'm so done with being treated this way and living this horrible life, because my life was miserable. Yeah. Like, it really wasn't worth living. The only thing that gave me joy was my kids.
Yeah, I know. It's amazing how they do that, huh?
So once I finally had the courage to get out, I was like, I'm going all in. I made a report to the IRS with him forging my signatures on our tax documents, and whoever the tax accountant was letting him do that, because I was never at the appointments. And I filed a police report for all of the credit card debt that I had. I even had evidence. I had gotten evidence from one of the credit card companies where it showed that it was my forged signature. And so I filed a police report and gave them evidence. And then I called immigration, because I know for sure there was one instance where he used my kids' birth certificates to bring up a toddler from Mexico. It was his nephew's baby.
What happened to this baby?
He's still up in Portland area.
Interesting. Is he going by a different name? Does he have his own birth certificate?
He entered the country under my son's name. I don't know which birth certificate the husband used, but it was one of my kids' birth certificates. Wow. Because he flew back on the plane with him.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Huh.
So once I did all of that, I was already married to the second husband, and I probably was about 6 months pregnant, and immigration finally contacted me, and they're like, we got your report and we want to interview you. And so they called me at work and came and interviewed me, and then I don't know, went back to their office and did whatever stuff they had to do, and then reached back out and said that they wanted to do an undercover operation and if we would help them.
So did you go through the whole cult part of it, or was it really more about just bringing people over?
Well, see, the whole cult part, I didn't even know that there was anything wrong with any of that yet. So I don't think I really told them a whole lot about the cult, because to me, my life was still normal.
Yeah.
Like all of that was normal. I knew no better, you know?
Right.
So I don't think I told them about any of that.
So they weren't able to connect the dots of how big of an operation this really was.
Yeah.
It was really just focused on your first husband primarily.
Yeah. And there was a bunch of people that were deported during that operation.
That he had brought up?
Uh-huh.
Oh, okay.
Or that were living with him too.
Yeah.
Brought up or living with.
Did he ever serve any time?
No. I believe he just got probation.
Yeah, sounds about right.
The immigration officer, he wanted me to come up from Mexico to testify, but I couldn't because that was right after they made that law that you had to have a passport to travel. Because remember back in the day, you didn't have to have a passport to travel. You could just go with your birth certificate.
Yes.
Yeah. So it was right after that they made that law. So I was stuck down in Mexico with no passport.
Oh, no.
So I went to the Mexican consulate in Merida, Mexico to get my or the American consulate, the American embassy, to get my passport down there. But his trial was already done and over. And I believe he just got like probation.
Wow.
Yeah. His doctor wrote him a letter that he couldn't do time.
Interesting. I mean, we hear about this all the time about people who just like do crazy stuff, federal charges, and then they just walk away. It's amazing how, I mean, it's amazing how it seems to be so weighted in some cases. But this is what happens when you have a sanctuary city.
Well, and we even had, we had voice recordings. We had a contract that he had signed because he brought up the second husband. He brought up the second husband's brother. And so they would pay the coyote to get across the border. And the prearranged husband would go down and pick them up and drive them back. Or he would, he would usually just do that. There might have been a couple of times where he sent someone down to pick them up, but he would go down and pick them up and drive them back up to Oregon.
So what did your second husband get out of this? He basically was allowed to...
He got a work permit.
He got a work permit.
And the brother-in-law.
And they didn't so they agreed not to send him back, essentially. Because he was one of the people that...
Was brought up.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. That must have been interesting. So did you have to wear a wire?
No, I didn't go in because he would have.
You're a woman, and we don't talk about that stuff with women, right?
Well, it might have made it look suspicious.
Got it.
That there was something going on. But we all had aliases. We went down to the immigration office in downtown Portland and did all the paperwork. We had aliases. We were confidential informants, and the second husband and his brother both got work permits for a year, but they got Social Security cards. So once your work permit expired, you still had a valid Social Security card. So you were still able to work. There's no one checking.
Right. So what was the fallout from that? Obviously the Oregonian or the ICE or whoever you were working for really dropped the ball. I mean, spelling your name out and your second husband's name out literally in the newspaper by name, not using your aliases, even though you had aliases. Yep. Do you remember what your alias was?
No, I don't.
Oh,
I wish I did. That would be funny.
To like drop it every once in a while.
I know. No, I don't remember. But we were planning on going to Mexico anyways, because the second ex-husband had a store down there and he was very much so an entrepreneur. So he knew how to make business, have businesses, start businesses, run businesses.
Yeah.
He was very savvy with that. So, and he was like, let's just go down to Mexico, get away from all of this drama. I'm like, okay. But before we left, and so the first husband, the prearranged husband, he knew that we were going to be going down at the end of the month.
Okay.
I don't remember what month it was. It was like September or October. And my first daughter was just a few months old, maybe 6 months old or so. And I was like, okay, sure, why not? I mean, I don't know, So
did you feel like in that situation you were like getting away from this cult, so it was like a fresh start for you?
Yeah, in a way.
Because I mean, you'd been there so long under the grasp of all that. I wonder if that was kind of like, sure, let's go.
Yeah, and the second ex-husband was a lot. It was a lot of the same, but there was no Bible, so it felt different.
So the control was there, but
and the abuse
and everything, and we'll get to that. But it was really, the Bible wasn't there, so it wasn't.
It didn't appear the same.
Yeah.
Because I wasn't having to read my Bible 16 hours a day.
Right.
So the first ex-husband knew that we were going to be going down to Mexico at the end of the month with the boys, because they're his boys. So I had to tell him. And then shortly after, he was talking to me on the phone, and he said, they're going to be coming to take care of you.
Who?
He had some cousins that were gang members up in Portland.
Oh, okay. So this was a direct threat.
Yes, this was a direct threat. So I called the police to report it. They came out and they said, well, unless he's standing in front of you with something that could cause you bodily harm, we do not see this as a threat. And they didn't even file a police report. They wouldn't even file a police report.
Wow.
And they knew, I told them about the immigration thing, and they were really upset because there was a lot of people in that house that got deported, and everyone was blaming me. So I became the target.
Clearly, yeah. Especially when they name you in the newspaper.
Mm-hmm.
That was in September of 2005 that was printed. So was that before you left for Mexico or after? Do you know if that newspaper article came out before or after?
2005.
It was like September 17th, as I recall, 2005 is when that article was written.
Yeah, so that was, I don't know if I think we went down in October, because I remember they were celebrating Dia de los Muertos, and that's in October.
That makes sense.
So, I tried to file my police report, and they wouldn't let me file the police report because he wasn't in front of me with something that could cause me harm. And I was like, okay, whatever, I guess.
Listen, I know this is a divisive topic right here, but this is why we have a Second Amendment, and you need to exercise your Second Amendment rights in this situation, because there's a lot of situations out there where the police can't or won't help you, and you're going to be on your own. So that's why in this house, we fully believe in our Second Amendment rights. We exercise them. Mm-hmm. Go ahead, continue.
We've already had threats.
Yes, we have already. We'll talk about that later on, won't we?
Mm-hmm. So, I realized there was not much I can do. So we went ahead with our plans and left for Mexico. And, there was a lot of bullshit in Mexico. Mm-hmm. And when we finally ended up coming back.
How long were you there for?
Probably 6 to 9 months.
Okay. And you and Adriel go into the deep depth of that.
Yes, because we're about to, next week we'll start talking about that. The whole second husband and the Mexico ordeal. But when we came back up, we left kind of in a hurry. So we left a lot of crap at the apartment that we hadn't disposed of. I did a garage sale and sold what I could, but there was a bit of stuff that we didn't take down to Mexico that we just left in the apartment because I didn't know what to do with it,
Yeah.
And it's almost like we were kind of leaving in a hurry,
Was that on just because you wanted to get down there, or do you think your second husband knew something?
I don't know.
Because he also was around some nefarious people too, right? Associated with them. Mm-hmm. You said he might have been.
Yeah, he was a coyote.
Cartel or something.
Yeah.
So I wonder if he got the word.
I don't know. But when we came back up from Mexico, I was like, okay, we need to hurry and find a place. And you know how hard it is to find an apartment when you don't have a job?
Yeah.
Neither of us were working yet. And so I went back to the old apartments where we were living at. And I was like, okay, I know we're not going to get our deposit back because, we left a bunch of stuff at the house that you guys had to dispose of. But I just want to see if you guys can give us a good reference because, we have kids and we're trying to find a place to stay so we don't have to live in the truck. Because the truck we drove down is the one that we drove back up from Mexico.
Sure.
And they're like, yeah, we'll give you a good reference. No, you're not getting your deposit back. And you should be thankful we're not charging you for any of the damages. And I was like, well, what damages? Because, I didn't make any there was no damages that I knew of.
Right.
We weren't even at that apartment for a year. We hadn't even renewed the lease yet. We were just there for a few months. And I was like, well, what damages are you talking about? And they're like, well, all the bullet holes that were in the house. They said one night in the middle of the night, someone came and shot up the apartment, and there were bullet holes that went through the walls and the downstairs bathroom. It went through the mirror and out through the kitchen. And I was like, what? I was like, are you serious? And they're like, yeah. And I was like, oh shit. That's when I realized like how serious, this really was. And often I've thought about trying to find that if there was any police report, but
you would think they would, but I mean, I guess it depends on the apartment manager if they're going to report it. They might just fill in the holes with some spackle and call it good.
Yeah.
I mean, was it a rough part of town or?
Not back then, but now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So that was pretty shocking to hear because I did not expect that at all.
So this is what happens when you name confidential informants and don't use their aliases, guys. This is what happens when you put it in the newspaper. Yeah. Like it's unbelievable. Like the incompetence that is just everywhere. Like nobody can do their dang jobs. I don't understand it.
I don't know. And the crazy part too is that same ICE agent was the one that let the second ex-husband come back, re-enter illegally, when we came back from Mexico. Yeah,
that proves to be a terrible choice.
Well, he no longer works there. Now he works with the DEA.
Oh, wonderful. So now he can take all the drugs and sell them that he confiscates. Yeah. Jeez, just corruption everywhere, seems like.
Yeah.
Or incompetence, one of the two. Maybe both.
Yeah. I think it's a combination of both.
So I wanted to end this by this first part, because we're going to get into a little bit more kind of the psychological stuff and kind of how that has played out over the last, 20 years or so. And really just as the things that I've noticed. But I thought maybe we'd tell everybody how you and I met and how long we've been married and all that stuff.
Okay.
So do you want to tell the story?
So we met on Plenty of Fish.
It was Plenty of Fish, yeah.
Almost 5 years ago,
yep.
Right? We've been married 4 years now. And, I was living in a trailer because I had to keep breaking my leases because my second ex-husband, you guys will hear more about him, but he tried to kill his ex-wife in Mexico. And so I knew he was very capable and I had a price on my head. I was on a hit list and he kept finding where we were living. So I was moving a lot after the divorce to stay away from him, to hide from him. And finally, after I had broken my second lease, I was like, okay, what am I going to do? And then my mom was selling a travel trailer. It was like a 36-foot travel trailer.
Longer than mine.
Yeah. So I was like, you know what? That's perfect because if he finds out where I live or where I'm staying, all I need to do is find someone to drag my trailer out and move it somewhere else for me, So I felt like that was a pretty safe situation in, considering the circumstances. So I was living in a trailer and, we met.
And I was living in a trailer too. I had just come back from a deployment overseas. I was in Afghanistan and Kuwait, and my ex-wife, my wife at the time, but my ex-wife moved the kids and her to Oregon, which I can't be too upset about because if they hadn't come to Oregon, I would never have met you. Yes. So, it's kind of hard to be too upset about it. But so I moved from Arizona and I was selling my house in Arizona and I had a travel trailer and I lived in that because I was like, well, I got to wait till this house gets sold. And it took me like a year to get the dang thing sold. So yeah, we were both like nomads and just like coming out of crazy town. And we're like, it was wild. I mean, the first, we met on Plenty of Fish and we talked. I think we texted for a couple hours and then you're like, do you want to just talk on the phone? Which is funny because you don't even like talking on the phone.
Oh my gosh, I despise it.
I hate talking on the phone too. But we must have talked for 13 hours that first night. And we both, because it was right before COVID, it was right at COVID.
Yeah.
I mean, COVID was already hitting and they were already sending people home.
Yeah, I was already working from home.
And I had been working from home for a while. I'd been telecommuting for a few years. So I was kind of an old hat at that. But this was like you had just started telecommuting. Mm-hmm. So yeah, we talked for like 13 hours and then we decided we were going to meet. And she was a little farther north than me. And so we picked a spot in the middle, which is Depot Bay. Mm-hmm. If anybody in Oregon knows where Depot Bay is, just gorgeous. It's right on the coast. You're like literally, I mean, the highway is 10 feet from the ocean. And you sit on this little wall.
Sometimes you can see whales. Yep.
And so I think she made it a competition and she was like,
everything's always a competition.
We're going to meet for coffee and the first person that gets there buys coffee, right? Mm-hmm. So I was, I follow the speed limit, unlike some people.
I follow the speed limit too. I just left extra early.
Okay. Oh, okay.
Because I like to be first.
She likes to win. So we meet, and it was probably, 2 or 3 in the afternoon or so, and we drank our coffees and sat on this rock wall. And honestly, the next thing we knew, it was getting dark. And we hadn't peed. We hadn't eaten anything. We had just literally talked for 6-7 hours straight. And then we got up. We're like, we better move because I think my butt was getting numb or something sitting on that wall for so long. And so we just walked down and took a little walk and took a turn. It was what I say. We've never had a fight in our entire marriage ever.
No.
She's been a little annoyed at me because I can be a little grouchy curmudgeon sometimes. But we've never had a fight. And I don't think this typically works. This is what I always tell everybody. How everybody has a type and everybody's personality and they mesh, and also sometimes you hear opposites attract. Well, with whatever our personalities are, for whatever reason, we're very, very similar in almost every aspect. And there's some crazy stuff about how similar we are, like same number of kids, same exes, same number of exes. The way that things sync up.
You were in a cult, basically.
Yeah, basically. Grew up Mormon. Some would consider that a cult. So, although I think the true definition of a cult is versus a religion is once the leader dies, if it continues, then it's a religion. If the cult disbands as soon as the leader dies, then it's a cult.
Okay.
So that's just what I've heard before. So, but we can call it that. So yeah, we both grew up in these very restrictive, I would say, very religious households. Yours is putting that lightly, but as we talked about already. But anyway, the similarities are crazy, but for whatever reason, we just mesh like we're best friends, and
our desks are right next to each other.
We work together. We work 10 feet from each other all day, every day.
Who could do that?
I don't know. I know, not without going a little crazy.
Yeah.
But we have no problem. So that's a little introduction to Buck and Angie. Yeah. So why don't we end it here, and we'll come back for the next episode, and we'll talk a little bit more about the manifestation of this trauma in your life and how that really how that shapes who you are and how you've come out of that and things like that.
Well, and things that still linger.
And absolutely. And some may never go away. You just have to kind of learn to navigate around them sometimes.
Yeah.
So,
okay. Yeah. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.